At 1700 hours on February 22, 1943, in Munich's Stadelheim prison, 21-year-old Sophie Scholl walks calmly toward a guillotine. 4 hours earlier, she stood before the People's Court, charged with treason against the Third Reich. Now, as guards secure her beneath the blade, she speaks her final words. The sun still shines. Within 60 seconds, the executioner's work is done. Sophie Scholl becomes one of the estimated 300,000 German women who will die under Nazi rule, not from Allied bombs or battlefield casualties, but from the very regime that promised to honor them as mothers of the nation. This is the story of German women under the Third Reich, not through the propaganda lens of Aryan motherhood and domestic bliss, but through the documented reality of surveillance, coercion, and survival in a totalitarian state that systematically controlled every aspect of female existence from womb to workplace to grave. On January 30th, 1933, when Adolf Hitler assumes the chancellorship of Germany, approximately 40 million women live within the Reich's borders. Within 6 months, their lives will begin to transform in ways few can anticipate. The Nazi vision for German women arrives packaged in a deceptively simple slogan: kinder, Küche, Kirche, children, kitchen, church. But behind this folksy trinity lies a comprehensive system of social engineering designed to transform women's bodies into instruments of state policy. The transformation begins immediately. In June 1933, the law for the reduction of unemployment introduces marriage loans of 1,000 Reichsmarks, roughly 8 months' wages for an average worker, to newly married couples. The condition: the bride must leave her job and pledge not to return to employment. Within the first year, 200,000 women accept these loans and exit the workforce. It seems voluntary. It is not. Those who refuse face mounting pressure from employers, families, and Nazi Party officials, who appear at their doors with questions about their loyalty to the Volksgemeinschaft, the people's community. By 1934, women are systematically purged from professional positions. Universities impose quotas limiting female students to 10% of total enrollment. Documented evidence shows that approximately 19,000 women lose teaching positions in higher education between 1933 and 1936. Medical schools refuse to admit women. Legal careers become inaccessible. Civil service regulations explicitly bar married women from government employment. The message arrives through official channels, but permeates every level of society. Your value lies not in your mind, but in your womb. The Nazi Women's League, the National Frauenschaft, becomes the primary instrument of this transformation. By 1938, it counts 2.3 million members, though membership is functionally compulsory for women seeking any form of social or economic security. League representatives organize neighborhood block watches where women monitor each other's behavior, report those who violate pregnancy guidelines, and enforce conformity to Nazi ideals of femininity. In Munich, a mother of 3 faces investigation after neighbors report her for expressing doubts about producing more children. In Hamburg, a woman seeking contraception finds herself summoned before local Nazi officials who question her commitment to the Reich. The surveillance is pervasive and inescapable. For young women, indoctrination begins at age 10 when membership in the League of German Girls, the Bund Deutscher Mädel, becomes mandatory in 1936. By 1939, 3.5 million girls belong to the organization. The training manual is explicit about its goals. The German girl belongs to God, her Volk, and her Führer. Her body belongs to the nation. Girls attend weekly meetings where they learn not mathematics or literature, but domestic skills, racial hygiene, and preparation for motherhood. They memorize propaganda about the superiority of the Aryan race. They participate in physical training designed not for health, but for producing strong children. They sing songs praising sacrifice for the fatherland. The pressure to reproduce intensifies with every passing year. On December 16, 1938, Hitler personally signs the decree establishing the Cross of Honor of the German mother, the Mutterkreuz. The medal comes in 3 tiers: bronze for 4 children, silver for 6, gold for 8 or more. By Mother's Day, 1939, 3 million women receive these medals in ceremonies designed to rival military honors. The symbolism is intentional. Women who produce children are soldiers in the biological war for Aryan supremacy. Those who fail face social ostracism and official suspicion. But the Nazi breeding program extends far beyond medals and propaganda. In 1935, SS Chief Heinrich Himmler creates the Lebensborn program, literally, fount of life, a state-directed system of maternity homes for unmarried pregnant women deemed racially valuable. The program operates in secrecy, established on private country estates where pregnant women arrive to give birth away from judgmental eyes. The conditions for acceptance are stringent. Applicants must prove Aryan ancestry for 3 generations, undergo medical examinations to verify racial purity, and submit family histories to verify no hereditary diseases or disabilities. Between 1935 and 1945, approximately 8,000 children are born in Lebensborn homes across Germany and occupied territories. The program assumes guardianship of these children, determines where they will be raised, and maintains absolute discretion about their origins. SS officers are encouraged to father children regardless of marital status. Single mothers receive financial support and protected anonymity. The goal, documented in internal SS memos, is to produce 100,000 additional Aryan children annually. The program fails to meet these targets, but not for lack of state coercion. While the regime celebrates motherhood, it simultaneously implements policies of reproductive control that reveal the darker logic beneath the propaganda. On July 14, 1933, the Law for the Prevention of Offspring with Hereditary Diseases authorizes compulsory sterilization for individuals deemed genetically inferior. Between 1934 and 1945, hereditary health courts Erbgesundheitsgerichtshof the sterilization of approximately 400,000 German citizens, including at least 160,000 women. The targeted conditions include schizophrenia, epilepsy, blindness, severe alcoholism, and even social behaviors labeled moral deficiency. The courts operate with ruthless efficiency. A woman diagnosed with depression may find herself forcibly sterilized. A teenage girl who engages in premarital sex can be labeled morally deficient and reported to authorities. The procedures are performed without consent, often without anesthesia, and complications from the surgeries result in hundreds of deaths. The same regime that honors women for bearing children strips reproductive choice from those it deems unworthy. The contradiction is not an oversight. It is the entire point. In Nazi Germany, women's bodies exist not for themselves, but as instruments of racial policy. This is the promise: become a mother of the Aryan race and receive honor, financial support, social status. Fail to comply or fail to meet racial standards and face sterilization, surveillance, and systematic exclusion. Between 1933 and 1939, this system operates with increasing intensity as the Nazi state constructs a society where women's value is measured entirely by their biological utility. But as Germany hurtles toward war, even this promise will prove hollow. On September 1, 1939, when German forces invade Poland, the Nazi promise to German women begins its rapid disintegration. The contradiction at the heart of Nazi gender policy becomes immediately apparent. A total war requires total mobilization, and Germany cannot fight on multiple fronts while keeping millions of women confined to domestic life. Within months, the regime that spent 6 years pushing women out of the workforce begins desperately pulling them back in. The reversal begins quietly. Marriage loan recipients who pledge never to work receive notices that their obligations have been temporarily suspended. The duty year program, already mandatory for unmarried women since 1930-80, expands to require all single women under 25 to complete 1 year of service in war-related industries or agricultural work. By 1940, factory owners petitioned the government for female workers as men disappear into Wehrmacht uniforms. The official ideology remains unchanged: women belong at home. But the reality documented in employment statistics tells a different story. Between 1939 and 1944, the number of German women in the workforce increases from approximately 14.6 million to 14.9 million. But this modest figure masks a more dramatic shift. Women now constitute 51% of the domestic workforce, and they labor in industries previously considered unsuitable for females. The conditions these women face bear little resemblance to the promised domestic ideal. In munitions factories across the Reich, women work 12-hour shifts manufacturing artillery shells, rifles, and aircraft components. The work is dangerous. Industrial accidents increase as safety standards erode under wartime production quotas. In a Berlin armaments plant, a woman loses 3 fingers when machinery malfunctions. She receives 2 weeks' pay and a replacement assignment. In Essen, explosion at the Krupp works kills 17 female workers in a single incident. The factory resumes production the following day. The regime's response to labor shortages reveals its essential brutality. Rather than further expand female German employment, which would too obviously contradict Nazi ideology, Germany imports forced laborers from occupied territories. By 1944, approximately 7.6 million foreign workers labor in German factories, farms, and households. Among them are 1.9 million women, predominantly from Poland, Ukraine, and the Soviet Union. These women endure conditions that German workers, however difficult their circumstances, are spared. They live in barracks, receive starvation rations, face sexual exploitation, and work under constant threat of violence. German women, whether willingly or under coercion, become supervisors, administrators, and beneficiaries of this slave labor system. Meanwhile, on the home front, daily survival becomes an escalating battle. The rationing system introduced in September 1939 provides German civilians with food coupons organized by category. Bread stamps, meat stamps, fat stamps, each carefully calculated to provide approximately 2,000 to 2,800 calories per day for normal consumers. Heavy laborers receive additional allotments. But these official figures bear little relationship to reality as the war progresses. By 1943, as Allied bombing intensifies and supply lines fracture, the actual caloric intake for many German women falls below 1,500 calories daily, a level that produces chronic malnutrition. In a Leipzig apartment, a mother of 2 records in her diary the reality of feeding a family in 1944. Tuesday, received bread ration, 1,800 grams for the week. No meat available. Used fat coupons for margarine, 250 grams. Potatoes scarce. Children always hungry. This is not an exceptional situation. It is the norm. Women stand in queues for hours, often finding shelves empty when their turn arrives. The black market flourishes. Those with money or connections can supplement rations, but for most families, hunger becomes a constant companion. Mothers give their portions to children. Women grow thin, develop vitamin deficiencies, and suffer health complications that will persist long after the war ends. Then, the bombs begin to fall in earnest. The British Royal Air Force launches its first major bombing raid on Hamburg in July 1943. Operation Gomorrah, dropping 2,300 tons of bombs over 8 days. The resulting firestorm kills approximately 37,000 civilians, the majority of them women, children, and elderly men. The temperature in the city center reaches 800 degrees Celsius. People die not from direct hits, but from asphyxiation as the fires consume all oxygen. In the aftermath, women face the task of identifying bodies, often recognizable only by jewelry or dental work. The bombing campaign expands across every major German city. Dresden, Hamburg, Berlin, Cologne, Essen. By 1945, no urban center remains unscathed. Statistics compiled from German civil defense records document that approximately 350,000 to 400,000 German civilians die in Allied bombing raids, with women comprising roughly 60% of these casualties. The disproportion is simple mathematics. Most men are at the front. Women and children bear the brunt of strategic bombing at home. The bombing transforms daily existence into a ritual of terror. Air raid sirens wail. Women grab children and whatever possessions they can carry and run to cellars, shelters, or subway tunnels. They crouch in darkness, feeling buildings shake, hearing explosions, praying their homes survive. Sometimes they emerge to find their streets obliterated. A woman in Cologne describes returning from a shelter to find her apartment block reduced to rubble. Everything gone. 30 years of life furniture, photographs, my mother's dishes buried under tons of broken stone. We stood in the street with the clothes on our backs and nowhere to go. As cities burn, some women choose resistance. The white rose dye Weiss Rose emerges at the University of Munich in 1942, founded by siblings Hans and Sophie Scholl, along with fellow students. Between June 1942 and February 1943, the group produces and distributes 6 leaflets calling for passive resistance against the Nazi regime. The leaflets are carefully worded, morally impassioned arguments against tyranny. They cite specific Nazi crimes, reference philosophy and theology, and appeal to German sense of justice. Sophie Scholl joins her brother's efforts in the summer of 1942. At 21 years old, she is a biology and philosophy student, a daughter of a liberal Christian family, and a former member of the League of German Girls who has grown disillusioned with Nazi ideology. She helps write, copy, and distribute leaflets, fully aware that discovery means death. On February 18, 1943, while distributing leaflets at the university, Sophie and Hans are observed by a janitor, Jakob Schmid, who reports them to the Gestapo. They are arrested immediately. The interrogation lasts 4 days. Gestapo records document that Sophie initially attempts to shield her brother and fellow conspirators, claiming sole responsibility. When this fails, she maintains calm dignity, defending her actions as moral necessity. On February 22, 1943, Sophie Scholl, Hans Scholl, and Christoph Probst stand trial before the People's Court. The presiding judge, Roland Freisler, conducts not a trial, but a propaganda show designed to demonstrate Nazi justice. The verdict is predetermined. All 3 are sentenced to death by guillotine. The executions occur the same afternoon. Sophie is 21 years old. From arrest to execution, 4 days. Sophie Scholl is not alone. Across Germany, thousands of women engage in various forms of resistance harboring Jews, distributing anti-Nazi literature, providing false documents, sharing forbidden information. The risks are catastrophic, the outcomes usually tragic. Of the estimated 77,000 Germans executed for resistance activities during the Third Reich, approximately 8,000 are women. Their names are largely forgotten, their stories buried beneath the weight of larger historical narratives. By early 1945, the Third Reich is dying, and German women face its death throes. The front lines collapse. Soviet forces advance from the east. American and British armies push from the west. The Nazi leadership, ensconced in Berlin bunkers, continues to issue grandiose proclamations about final victory while the nation disintegrates. Women in eastern Germany face a particular horror as the Red Army approaches, bringing with it documented accounts of mass sexual violence. Estimates vary, but research suggests that between 400,000 and 2 million German women are raped by Soviet soldiers between 1945 and 1948, with the highest concentrations occurring during the initial occupation period. In Berlin, a woman who keeps a diary throughout the final months published decades later as A Woman in Berlin records the calculation that becomes commonplace. Finding one officer to claim her as his exclusive mistress provides protection from gang rapes by ordinary soldiers. Better one wolf than a pack becomes a survival strategy whispered among women. The horror is systematic enough that even German military hospitals create special wards for rape victims, though these prove woefully inadequate as medical infrastructure collapses. The Nazi regime's final months reveal the ultimate worthlessness of its promises to women. As Allied armies close in, Heinrich Himmler issues orders to evacuate concentration camps, forcing prisoners on death marches. Among the 3,500 female concentration camp guards who served the regime, some now face reckoning. At Ravensbrück, the largest women's concentration camp, approximately 50,000 women and children are murdered during its operation from 1939 to 1945. The female guards who administered daily violence, whipping, beating, selecting prisoners for execution now, attempt to blend into civilian populations or flee westward ahead of Soviet forces. The hypocrisy is staggering. Women who served as guards, administrators, and collaborators in the machinery of genocide claimed they were merely following orders, simply doing their jobs. Documents from post-war trials reveal that female guards at Ravensbrück and other camps volunteered for their positions, received salaries, and in many cases displayed enthusiasm for their work. Yet in post-war testimonies, these same women present themselves as victims of circumstances, powerless to resist Nazi coercion. The truth, documented in survivor testimonies and trial records, is more complex and far darker. Many were willing participants in atrocity. When the guns finally fall silent in May 1945, German women confront landscapes of annihilation. Berlin lies in ruins, approximately 75% of the city reduced to rubble. Hamburg, 55% destroyed. Cologne, 65%. Dresden, 80%. In total, Allied bombing creates approximately 400 million cubic meters of rubble across German cities. The task of clearing this debris falls primarily to women, not by choice, but by necessity. German men are dead, captured, or missing. The women remain. Enter the Trümmerfrauen, the rubble women. In Berlin alone, approximately 60,000 women register for rubble clearing work by the end of 1945. They are paid in food rations. 12 bricks cleaned and stacked equals 1 extra bread ration. The work is backbreaking. Women use hand tools to break apart concrete, sort bricks, clear twisted metal, and create pathways through destroyed streets. They form human chains, passing bricks hand to hand. They work in summer heat and winter cold. Many are malnourished, sick, traumatized by loss. They work anyway because their families need food and because the alternative is starvation. A woman in Munich, clearing rubble from what was once a residential block, discovers beneath the debris a child's doll, perfectly intact. She sits on a pile of broken bricks and weeps for the child who owned the doll. For her own children she struggles to feed, for the nation that promised honor and delivered destruction. Then she stands up and continues working because the rubble will not clear itself. The post-war reckoning for German women proves complicated and incomplete. Denazification tribunals focus overwhelmingly on male perpetrators as officers, military commanders, party officials. Women who served as concentration camp guards face prosecution, but the numbers are small relative to their actual involvement. Of the approximately 3,500 female guards who served in Nazi camps, fewer than 80 face serious legal consequences. Many return to normal civilian life, their pasts concealed or deliberately forgotten. The broader complicity of German women in Nazi crimes remains largely unexamined for decades. The narrative that emerges emphasizes women as victims of Allied bombing, of Soviet violence, of food shortages, of absent husbands. These victimizations are real and documented, but they coexist with other documented realities. The women who denounced Jewish neighbors, who staffed deportation offices, who profited from Aryanized businesses, who volunteered as camp guards, who raised children to embrace Nazi ideology. The recognition of women's agency in both resistance and complicity takes generations to emerge in German historical consciousness. By 1949, when Germany divides into separate East and West states, the immediate crisis of survival has stabilized. But the psychological, social, and demographic legacies of the Third Reich persist. An estimated 1.2 million German men died or went missing during the war, creating a generation of widows and single women. Millions of children grow up without fathers. The women who cleared rubble, managed households under bombing, survived occupation, and rebuilt from ruins carry trauma that manifests in silence, depression, and psychological scars they pass to their children. The myth of the Trümmerfrauen evolves into a narrative of resilience and reconstruction German women rebuilding their nation from ashes. There is truth in this narrative, but it also performs ideological work, allowing post-war German society to sidestep more difficult questions about complicity, collaboration, and the specific ways women participated in Nazi crimes. The image of women as passive victims or reconstruction heroes obscures the more complex reality. They were wives of SS officers, mothers who raised children in Nazi ideology, workers who benefited from slave labor, citizens who accepted the racial state's promises when those promises served their interests. What do we learn from the lives of German women under the Third Reich? The story resists simple conclusions. These women were not merely victims, though many suffered terribly. They were not solely perpetrators, though many participated in Nazi crimes. They existed, like all people under totalitarian rule, in zones of moral complexity where survival, complicity, and resistance intersected in ways that defy easy judgment. The documentary record reveals a regime that systematically manipulated women's desires for security, status, and belonging, channeling those human needs into policies of racial emanation and genocidal war. The promise of honor as mothers became surveillance and reproductive control. The celebration of domesticity became forced labor in war factories. The ideal of community became denunciation and terror. And when the regime collapsed, women bore disproportionate costs of its destruction. The questions raised by this history remain urgent in our present moment. How do societies convince women to participate in their own subjugation? The Nazi answer: offer security, status, and belonging in exchange for reproductive control and ideological conformity. How do totalitarian regimes mobilize female labor while maintaining ideologies of female domesticity? The Nazi answer: create contradictions so profound that citizens cannot articulate them without risking punishment. How do women navigate moral choices under regimes that criminalize conscience? Some choose resistance and die. Most make smaller compromises day after day and live with the accumulated weight of those choices. The women who survived carried their stories forward, though many chose silence. Sophie Scholl's story becomes a touchstone of resistance. Her final words, "The sun still shines," transformed into a symbol of moral courage. But for every Sophie Scholl who resisted, hundreds of thousands accepted, collaborated, or simply survived by looking away. Understanding this history requires holding multiple truths simultaneously. Women suffered immensely under Nazism, and women enabled Nazi crimes. These are not contradictory statements. They are the complex reality of life under totalitarian rule. Today, when we examine women's lives under the Third Reich, we confront not a simple morality tale, but a mirror reflecting uncomfortable questions about compliance, courage, and the gradual erosion of moral boundaries. The women who cleared rubble from Berlin's streets in 1945 were rebuilding a society they had helped sustain. The survivors who testified at war crimes trials, decades later, described both perpetrators and victims who shared the same language, the same culture, sometimes the same neighborhoods. The lessons are not comfortable, but they are essential. Tyranny succeeds not through the actions of monsters, but through the accumulated choices of ordinary people who convince themselves that adaptation is survival, that silence is safety, that looking away is not the same as participation. If you found this documentary valuable, please like this video and share it with others interested in understanding the complexities of history beyond simple narratives. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and what aspects of this history you'd like to explore further. Subscribe to keep this history alive, because understanding how totalitarian systems operate, how they promise security while delivering surveillance, how they celebrate women while controlling them, remains essential work in every generation. The sun still shines, but it illuminates difficult truths we must face if we are to learn from history rather than repeat it.